Hi, so this is my media report number 1. So in module 1, we watched the film Misrepresentation. Um, they show the power dynamic of representation when it comes to women in films and media, internet, and such. The ideology of white patriarchal capitalism works not only to naturalize the idea that wealthy white men deserve greater social privilege, but to protect those privileges by naturalizing various beliefs that degrade other groups. And we can see this through the example of African Americans um, as slaves and how, the white patriarchal capitalistic society, they benefited from these African Americans as being slaves. They benefited from it in an economic standpoint. Another quote that I have is that we notice women are perceived and represented through media. We notice like the things that show that women are misrepresented in the media. So we see like how women are usually stereotyped as being in the kitchen and like being in the household more often, taking care of the household, rather than going out into the working environment and providing for their household in that manner financially. And in many films, we often see like the bitchy boss who sacrifices her family and her social life in exchange for love. So it it's essentially brings her down as a woman because it says that like women aren't able to be both. Like they're not able to balance having a healthy social life with their friends and their family, and then also being able to have a love life and have a family, because they always like make it seem as if women, once they have that family, like it's like their lives are completely devoted to that and there's nothing else. Also, what's also misrepresented in film is the misrepresentation of women and how they're hyperly sexualized throughout media. And a lot of times in film, such as in Misrepresentation, we see how like women are just oftentimes more sexualized. In Module 2, we talk about sticky business, Hollywood, sexism, and censorship. So, a lot of time in today's film, we have strayed away from censorship of the nudity of women. Um, Also, a quote that I have is that Hollywood films dominate American theaters, that U.S. citizens have relatively little access to other types of films. Um, Censorship in media has been an issue that even the public is restricted from knowing how they rate films. So, in the movie, we see that they kind of have like a small group of organizers who come together and rate films, and usually it's a very biased and unfair process, as the public isn't even allowed to know exactly who is rating these films and what the basis of how they're rating it, because it it changes from time to time. um that becomes a issue when we see NC-17 and rated R films, and we see the bias within that, because a lot of times, like as you may know, we don't really go to the movie theater and we see a film that says NC-17 rated. Most of the times we see it's rated R, it's PG-13, it's PG, or it's G rated. And when it's NC-17, what I got from that is that it basically just like it diminishes like the value of the film. So yeah, various reconstructings of Hollywood's business practices have affected the ability of other types of films to get made and find audiences, essentially. In Module 3, we watched Forbidden, and this is Hollywood sexism and reimagining the script. The theme of this is women sacrificing their lives in hopes of a life with a man, and we see this in the film, as she, has a love interest, and she's just trying to figure out her emotions throughout the film and see, she's more of a free spirited person, and she's just choosing between her partners. And this is important because we don't really get to see a narrative in which a woman gets to like essentially choose who she wants to be with, more so like we see in the media that men, choose who they want to be with, and the woman just kind of plays a background character essentially. Um, Childlike and frequently associated with innocence, purity, and needed to be protected is oftentimes what women in media are portrayed as. Um, these gender stereotypes have carried along to today. Um, yeah. In module 4 now, we talk about gender, class, and sport media complex in the movie I, Tonya. The famous quote in this film is, "You are all my attackers." Essentially in this film, the theme is about women in sports, and Tonya ends up being a woman who is physically, mentally, emotionally abused throughout the film. She comes from a socio-economical background that is essentially very poor. She comes from like a working class family. She comes from a mother who's single. She turns out to be a single mother who is just very hard on her. She is physically abusive, mentally, emotionally abusive to her. And she grows up as an ice skater who cannot afford the same things as other women. She doesn't look like them. She's not, into the makeup, and she can't afford the fancy dresses, the fancy ice skates. She's more so like chopping wood every day. She's not the it girl. She's not the American girl that, they want to present to other countries as, what an American woman should be. She struggles a lot throughout this film, as we see like the abuse in her marriage that kind of like transfers from like her relationship with her mother growing up, and this is what she was being used to. And we see how women in sports get treated at this time, um, as her worth doesn't really matter. We see like an example with her, getting in an altercation with her husband, and she's clearly bleeding from her head, and the officer who pulls them over, kind of gives him a bly and lets him go. And we just see how, how men are just more so, men are more so like, believed in society. They more so have more worth than a woman, as we see in her abuse throughout the film. In Module 5, we talk about Latina Woman, racialized sexism, and the intersectionality of it all. In the film or the short documentary about Dolores, we realize Dolores challenges the portrayal of Latina woman as we see in media coverage. The theme of this entire documentary kind of shows us the misconceptions that we as a society sometimes hold of Latino women. I oftentimes see in film that directly corresponds with this quote is that Latinas are more likely than women of other ethnicities to be shown nude or partially nude in film. And I think that is something that's true to today as well, as we see like in film, Latina women, you hear the word spicy, and they overly sexualize women. Dolores is underwritten as a Latina activist, but within her community, she is very well known for her works. Again, that goes to showing like the intersectionality of like her gender playing a huge role as to why she is, underwritten as a Latina activist. Although her community may know her, we as a whole may not we haven't really gotten the grasp of her. Another quote from Benshoff and Griffin is that Latinos are sensitive and hot-blooded, and we see that also being portrayed out throughout the film, especially during romantic films. We see like Latinos being more sensitive, and there's also like a side where it's like they're very hot-blooded. They're very, like I said before, very spicy. They talk about how the women are very like, they're very vocal in their relationships that they have, and so forth. So just like the racialized sexism and overly hypersexualizing Latina woman. And in the film, in the documentary, we also go to see like Dolores, like putting aside her family to really help her community push forth into getting the rights that they needed, and how the media took that and kind of portrayed her as if she was this terrible mother, when oftentimes you see in film and we see in media that a lot of times men do the same things and they don't get necessarily criticized for leaving their family for a greater cause, and not leaving them completely, but being able to be an activist and still have your family is usually only shown when we're talking about woman activists. In module 6, Native American woman, we talk about the sexualized violence and the symbolic annihilation. The theme of this, we watched the film Wind River. We see how there's a sexualized violence on Native American women. And there's an intersectionality that comes in with it, as well as we see gender, race, and sexual violence all come together. The jurisdictional black hole has created a climate that many describes as an open season on Native women on reservations. And we see that through the film as, she's on this reservation and she has a partner who also works nearby, and she goes to visit him, and she was raped and killed by a group of white men who also worked on this reservation. And there's another quote that's not here, but it said that like over 80% of Native American women that are sexually violated on these reserves are by white men. So that also goes into how gender and race play a huge role in Native American women being, hypersexualized, and the sexual violence that go along with it. And then the last quote I have here is: the Hollywood Indian became a readily identifiable composite stereotype, one that draws traits from a variety of Native American cultures. He carried a bow and arrow, wore feather headdress and moccasins, and so forth, and he had a peace pipe. That also goes to show, like, just like the stereotypes that Hollywood has on Indians. Like, we only see them in the light of having that bow and arrow. We don't see them in the light of how they live in modern day today. And I think that goes to show like a huge problem as to why things like this happen. So just more representation in media would greatly affect how a more progressive world in terms of how we view media and how media goes to spread throughout our actual real lives. So thank you.